Hi, everyone, and welcome back once again to the Flourishing 40s podcast, where we curate thoughts from our thought leaders, experts, professionals in the space that can help us to increase in our purpose and productivity. Today, I've got with me Renee Smith, and I'm so excited to have her. She's an executive transformative leadership coach and currently working with the Leaders Career Accelerator Group. We're happy to have you here, Renee. How are you doing today?
I am excellent, Fufu. I'm pleased to be here and I'm excited to have the conversation.
Thank you so much. So let's jump right into it. I found out that one of the questions a lot of our audience come back with from time to time is how to improve their executive presence. Many of them are either sitting on boards, looking for sponsorships for their businesses, or even changing organizations. What would you say are the attributes that executive leaders at this level should have or companies are looking for?
Absolutely. Well, in terms of it, I think we probably have to backtrack and really understand what executive presence is. So, executive presence is an outcome, it's an output. So, if there's an output, it means you have to have inputs. So, what are those key inputs you're going to need in order to display executive presence? Number one, really know yourself. Be self aware. Know what's happening within you and how you're showing up. Secondly, you're going to really have to feel good about who you are. So, your self esteem, right? Sometimes we feel self conscious. Well, that's an energy, and that energy is what causes you to look awkward because you feel awkward.
Hmm.
Um, it's about your attitude. How do you see yourself? How do you see life? How do you see people? Um, that's a huge piece because, again, attitude is that invisible force that resonates within your body and shows up as you are engaging with people. So I have a complete model that goes through every single piece, but ultimately, it's really about how you're feeling within yourself and being aware, not only self, but also situational awareness.
Hmm.
So the way to go about, and I want to speak a little bit to situational awareness, and that is you're not going in to conform to what everyone else is doing. You're just being aware of who the players are. How do they engage? How do they play on this particular field? Because in every boardroom, it's a different field. They play the game differently. And it's important for you to know how it's being played and how to hit a home run.
Hmm. You mentioned a bit around that self-awareness. You called it, there's also the situational awareness, there's a self-awareness bit, and you're right, how we feel shows up in how we show up. And sometimes people say, bring your whole self to work. What's your perspective about that? Because sometimes you're feeling differently, but you need to show up at work. And leaders just show up in different ways, especially now, days where work and life have collapsed, right? It's the person at home and the person at work may not necessarily reflect differently. So, how would you address that?
Yeah. So there's no such thing as bring your whole self. You just can't bring your whole self, right? Because people can't manage all of who you are. Only you can
Mm,
manage all of who you
come
are.
on now.
And so when you think that, well, if I bring my whole self, well, what exactly are you asking other people to do? Right. So that's the first thing I would say is that be aware of who you want to be in this moment and show up as that person. That doesn't mean you're being fake, doesn't mean you're being phony. It simply means that you're present to what this moment needs from you.
Mm, all right. So that leads me to how important is it then to have your own personal brand as a leader? There's always the corporate brand, which we're very conscious about, but I think many leaders do not focus a lot on that personal brand part. Why is it important as we develop in the organization?
Yeah, so I often share with people that, I ask when I speak in front of an audience, do you have a brand? And many people will say no. And I want to dispel that myth that you do have a brand. But also, I think it's important, there's a more important question to ask, and that is your brand effective? Is it doing what you want it to do? And so the branding process is really about you getting present as to who you are, what you want, and how you want to get there. And then showing up in the power of who you are so that people see your beauty, your brilliance, and your ability. I like to use the three C's: your courage, your confidence, and your competence, so
Mm.
that they will want to engage with you.
Right, right. So if I think about my audience, because most of them are in their 40s, either early 40s or mid or late, and most of them are in those leadership positions, either founders of their businesses or their leading organizations. And you talked about courage, you talked about confidence, you talked about competence. What part should they focus a lot more at this stage? Because they're already in senior leadership. What should they be focusing on more?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you asked that question because there's something driving that question, which makes me wonder if you're thinking, wow, well, if they're in that position, they should already be courageous. If
Mm,
they're in that position, they should already be confident. If they're already in that position, they should already be competent. It's likely that they're more competent than they are confident.
mm,
It's likely they're more competent than they are courageous. And you
right.
would think it would be inverse. Having coached CEOs from who run billion-dollar operations, VPs at Amazon who have massive global organizations, every single person I have coached have had the question, "What do you think?" Um, do you believe that this is the way to go? What is your opinion? Right? That doubt, that thing called doubt. I want to define for you what I believe courage is and what confidence is so that we're on the same page.
Yeah, let's do that.
So in my first book, There Is More Inside, I define courage as your willingness to fall, knowing that you have the power within to get back up. So that means
Wow.
that I'm going to take a step. And even if I kind of, I can get back up, I have that capacity, I have that ability, I have that thing inside of me that will give me the ability to bounce back and bounce back quickly. What do I mean by confidence? And it's really interesting because when I was writing There Is More Inside, the very first book, released in 2005, right? So I'm taking you way back to the foundation of what it means to really be whole and really be able to project yourself in a way that gets you noticed. I was wondering at that time, well, what is confidence? Because everybody says, well, confidence is believing in yourself. Okay. And what does that mean? I believe that confidence is trusting your opinion of yourself more than you trust other people's opinion about you. I'm
Wow.
going to let that land. Okay.
Mm,
So when you trust yourself enough to know that I have the competence to show up, that my brilliance will shine through, that you're not questioning, well, will this person like me? Because you're not there to figure out whether people will like you or accept you. You just show up in who you are and the power of who you are and the light that is within, the brilliance that is within, the talent, the innovation, all those things are the things that draw people in.
wow. Now, there's something you said I want to double click on because you talked about that level of trust in yourself and in your competence. How do we improve that? Or how do we develop that to a level where you're not so bothered by what the other person would say? Because I think somewhere here is the conversation around imposter syndrome and all that. And people have defined that also in different ways. But how do we develop that trust in ourselves and in our competence enough not to bother about other people? Not that you're not aware, right? But you're not allowing that to influence your actions. Please say more.
Yeah. It starts with self-reflection. We don't take enough time to reflect on ourselves and to reflect on our accomplishments. When was the last time that you sat down and read your own bio?
You're right. We're too busy.
Exactly. Exactly. And so you don't know how far you've even come. And if you don't take that time to recognize those things that you've overcome, the skills that you've developed along the way, the courage, the confidence, the competence, the audacity, the tenacity, all the wonderful um, uh, characteristics that you've developed along the way, then guess what? If you don't know you possess them, and someone else has to tell you, then it's like you're like, really? Do you think so? Right? Versus thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad that you see it. Right.
You're right. You're right. And that shows up even in the conversation, because even what you just ended with now, when someone says that, being able to accept the compliment, like, oh, not really, but it's like, thank you. I appreciate that. That there's an assertiveness that comes with it. And you can tell when you see leaders who do that. Now, there may be others who tend towards that either cocky nature or it's just an egoistic kind of response. So how should leaders also, I trust myself, I trust my competence, I show up in my power. How do I balance that and not sound overly too confident, or if there's ever a thing like that, or people thinking you're too proud? How do leaders manage that?
Yeah. So in your question, you said without people thinking, right? So it's going back to that whole concept of confidence is trusting myself more than I trust other people's opinion about me, right? But it also goes back to situational awareness. So it's really interesting because society really talks about how many people have low self-esteem, like the statistics are out there. And we want our children to grow up to be confident in who they are. But yet the moment that someone shows up in their confidence, then what happens, right? What I say is be you, be who you are, be confident in who you are, and know that it is your confidence that draws people in. It is your self-awareness of knowing who you are and the value that you bring to the conversation is what draws people in. And remember this, because this is so vitally important. The first time I heard it was years ago or read it. Zig Ziglar said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. So it's important that when you show up, you should have the confidence, but knowing that you showed up to serve. And when you show up to serve and you care enough about other people, you draw them in to your space. And that's where you're able to engage and create a connection in order to create value for them.
Right, right. Very helpful. Thank you for sharing. I had another question which I was going to ask you today, and it was around one of the leaders I was coaching, and we're talking about the difference between assertiveness, aggressiveness, and passiveness, because that's something that keeps coming up in the workplace. So how would you describe this attributes, and why is assertiveness the right balance in the middle?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. I love using formulas because I think that they really help people to see and drive home points. And of course, I'm a teacher at heart. So when you look at assertiveness, uh, executive presence, confidence, there's always an input. Those are outputs. So assertiveness to me has three inputs. It would be courage, confidence, and communication, right? When you look at I've already given you the definition of courage, remember?
Yeah.
I'm willing to take a chance on myself. Confidence. I trust myself to take that chance. Communication. I want to engage with you and expect you to engage back. I have something important to say that you need to hear. And I'm not saying it only for me. I'm saying it because it's going to bring value to you. And I'm clear about that. So that's the value of the assertiveness, right? That I'm not aggressive. I'm not going to force my point of view on you, but I create the space for you also to have an opinion. Let me give you an example. So I work for a company, and my manager was meeting with my team without my knowledge. So I could have taken an aggressive perspective and told him off, right? Whatever that means or looks like for you. But it's, I don't respect you, I don't like you, and I don't like what you've done. I could take a passive response, which is, I know you're doing it, but I'm not going to say anything. And I'm just going to allow that anger to manifest itself in my body. Or I could take an assertive approach. Here's what I did. I allowed it to happen several times. And then during our one-on-one, remember, I said one-on-one, no one else was in the room except me and my manager. I told him what the behavior was, the impact of the behavior, and how it made me feel, right? So those were the three components of me being assertive. What was the behavior? What was the impact? And how it made me feel. He then apologized and said, oh, this is what I'll do moving forward. For me, that didn't work. And so instead of getting aggressive or passive, I said, while I appreciate that suggestion, here's what would work well for me and my team. And then he took my proposal. So what happened in that conversation? One, I knew the intention of the conversation, and I understood what constitutes success, the agenda, and what constitutes success. What happens for most of us? We go into a meeting, we don't always know why we're there, so we don't have an agenda, and then we don't know what constitutes success. So when we leave the meeting and we reflect on what has happened and what has been the decision, we're upset. Right? So when you take those two things, agenda and what constitutes success, into the meeting, then it can lean more toward in your favor, or at least it's an opportunity to negotiate.
I like that. I like that. And you made me think a bit of different scenarios as well as you were talking about that scenario, because that's a common one that happens in the workplace. And even sometimes when you change organizations, you're working in a new team, you have a new manager, you're learning each other's styles, having those one-on-one, like you said, not just an outburst in public, but those one-on-one conversations. But what was powerful in that example is you didn't just stop at what the suggestion was. You also thought about, this is what I think would work for myself and my team. And many times we have those conversations, but like you said, we don't go in there with what constitutes success. What does success look like? And having a conversation around that in your mind before you go into the meeting is powerful, because then you're able to not just listen, but also influence certain decisions that you think are important. But let's double click. Right. I just want to double click into that, because I think that's a powerful reminder for most leaders and for our listeners and viewers as well. Going into a meeting, knowing what the agenda is, being very clear, having an agenda, because whether we like it or not, we all have an agenda. We probably just don't realize it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then knowing what constitutes success. And that could mean you show up in different ways in the conversation because you know what the end result could look like. So how do we develop ourselves into more effective leaders in that way, where you're assertive? Yes, you understand the agenda and you're working a bit more intentional in meetings? Say more about it and maybe give us another example.
Yeah. So I think that you said it when you said intentional. So having a brand and being intentional about who you are and how you show up. So I'm going to back up to something that we talked about earlier, which is self-reflection, knowing your values, knowing what's important to you, being real clear on how you like to be treated, how you want to treat others. That's what really are our drivers, and that's how we show up the way we do. And so it's really all about self-reflection. It's really all about being clear on what's important to you. It's being clear on what success looks like for you. It overall, high level, what does a successful relationship between you and your manager look like, or your leader? What does success look like in your business? What does success look like in terms of you in the world as you navigate? This can also be applicable as a parent, as a husband, as a wife, as in every aspect of your life. It deserves your attention. Deserves it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And let me go back into that as well. So for leaders who are thinking about developing their brand or showing up in a better way, you mentioned the starting point is really that self-reflection. So how do we get out of our busy lives and start that self-reflection as we wrap up the conversation? What is it that we need to do to start with, so that maybe 3 months from now, someone else listening to this podcast can get and say, okay, I learned that then, I've practiced it, and this is the outcome I'm getting. Where do we start?
Yeah, with a decision. With the decision that your life is important. So that's what it is. My life is important enough to pay attention to it, right? Which means I'm paying attention to myself, which means that I'm always willing to take the time to listen to myself, develop myself, and reflect on who I'm being and how I'm showing up to ensure that I reach the highest level of who I am and who I was created to be.
That's so powerful. People in their 40s are going through different changes. Every generation has it. So we talk millennials, but many times we put a lot of the stereotypes and it creates societal pressure or expectations. So if you had something to say to our viewers who are mostly in their 40s, who want to thrive in life, in purpose, in productivity, in whatever they're doing, what would be your advice to them?
Wow, that's a good question. What would be my advice? I was listening to a message this morning during my walk, and it said, um, um, it was about time. And I'm trying to remember the title, but it was really about everything has perfect timing. So you don't have to push, you don't have to shove, you don't have to be frustrated, you don't have to have anxiety, you don't have to be like, oh, it has to happen now. Just know that every moment is perfectly timed for the best, and the betterment of every other human being on earth. And it's not just about you, it's about the collective. And if you could get that, if it's not happening in its moment, it's not meant to, but it will, keep sowing your seeds, and you are absolutely reap the benefits of all the hard work that you put in. It's just a matter of time.
Woohoo! I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for being here with us, Renee, where we've learned a lot, and I'm sure there's a lot to unpack in there, from self-awareness to managing ourselves to showing up in our courage, our confidence, our competence. And then we also talked communication as well. And those farewell words were also very helpful. There you go, flourishing 40s. Very important to understand in the season of life, maximizing it. But it's not just about us. There's something about what we bring to the world around us, but it starts first from inside of us. And those are some of the lessons we've learned today. If people want to connect with you as Renee, what's the best way they can reach out?
Sure. Of course, LinkedIn is the best place. I encourage you to follow. I have a series going on right now, and I think you'll learn a lot but connect, follow, DM me from there, or send me an email at srenee@srenee.com, SRENEE@srenee.com, or 888-588-0423. And you can visit my website at srenee.com for that information.
Wonderful. It's been a pleasure having you here. We wish you the best of the rest of your day. And to everyone who's listening or watching, be unstoppable. Bye for now.
Thanks.